Elena Vasquez had been forgotten in her Arizona Territory jail cell for 23 days, left to starve by a corrupt sheriff who decided Mexican girls didn't deserve justice or food. When a mysterious boy appeared with bread and a brass key, whispering, "I was caged too," she realized her salvation might come from the most unexpected source. But would his dark secret about his own imprisonment be the key to her freedom, or lead them both deeper into danger? The iron bars burned Elena's hands like fire in the blazing Arizona sun. She pulled back fast, shaking her fingers to cool them down. The jail cell smelled worse than a pig pen, and flies buzzed around her head like tiny black clouds. "Water," she whispered, but her voice came out like sand scraping on rock. Her throat felt as dry as the desert outside. Through the small window, she could see the town of Copper Ridge spread out below the jail. Dust devils danced between the wooden buildings, and she watched people walking around freely while she sat trapped like a caged bird. 3 whole days had passed since anyone brought her food. Her stomach made angry, growling sounds that echoed off the stone walls. She pressed her hand against her belly, trying to make the pain go away. The sheriff's wife had made it very clear. No meals for the girl who took bread from the store. "Let her learn what stealing gets you," the mean woman had said, her pale eyes cold as winter ice. But Elena knew the truth. She never stole anything. Mrs. Henderson, the store owner, had been acting strange lately. People whispered that she drank too much whiskey and forgot things. But nobody wanted to hear Elena's side of the story. Nobody cared what a 15-year-old Mexican girl had to say. Elena scratched another line into the wall with a small pebble. 23 marks now. 23 long days since Sheriff Morrison dragged her from her family's small house and threw her in this cage. Her mama had cried and begged, but the sheriff just laughed. "Should have taught your daughter better manners," he had growled. The wooden door at the end of the hallway creaked open. Elena's heart jumped with hope. Maybe someone finally brought food. Maybe her mama found a way to help her. But heavy footsteps walked past her cell without stopping, just like every other time. Elena curled up on the thin pile of hay that served as her bed. The straw poked through her worn dress and scratched her skin. She closed her eyes and tried to remember better times. Like when Papa was still alive, before the mine accident took him away. Back then, she felt safe and loved. Now she felt forgotten by the whole world. A lizard scurried across the floor, its tiny claws clicking on the stones. Elena watched it squeeze through a crack in the wall and disappear into freedom. She wished she could shrink down and follow it outside, away from this nightmare. The sun moved across the sky, painting long shadows through her window. Soon it would be dark again. Another night of listening to scary sounds echoing through the jail. Another night of wondering if tomorrow would bring help or just more emptiness. Elena's fingers found the small wooden cross her mama had made for her. She held it tight and whispered a prayer. Even though God seemed far away from this terrible place, the cross was smooth from all her touching, worn down by desperate hands seeking comfort. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew. Elena knew it carried people to new places, new chances, new lives. But that train might as well have been on the moon. She was stuck here, forgotten and alone, while the world kept moving without her. Her eyes drifted to the barred window again. The first stars were starting to appear in the darkening sky. Each one looked like a tiny candle of hope, but they felt impossibly far away. Just like freedom. Just like justice. Just like anyone who might care enough to help her. The jail grew quiet except for the sound of her own breathing. Elena pulled her thin blanket up to her chin and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would mark 24 days. How many more lines would she scratch into that wall before someone remembered she existed? But Elena didn't know that tomorrow would be different. She didn't know that help was coming from the most unexpected place. She didn't know that a boy with secrets of his own was already planning to find her. As sleep finally came, Elena dreamed of flying over the desert on wings made of starlight, leaving her cage far behind. In her dreams, she was free. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, but these sounded different, lighter, careful. Elena opened her eyes as a shadow appeared outside her cell. "You look like you're starving," said a voice she'd never heard before. Elena sat up fast, her head spinning from hunger. A boy about her age stood beyond the bars. He had dark brown hair that fell across bright green eyes, and his clothes looked clean, but patched in several places. In his hands, he held a cloth bundle that smelled like heaven, fresh bread, and maybe even cheese. "Who are you?" Elena whispered, glancing toward the sheriff's office at the end of the hall. "My name is Marcus Webb," the boy said, kneeling down beside her cell. "My papa runs the blacksmith shop in town." He pushed the cloth bundle through the small gap under her cell door. "Don't worry about Sheriff Morrison. He's sleeping off a bottle of whiskey. Won't wake up until the sun goes down." Elena's hands shook as she unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a thick slice of bread, a chunk of yellow cheese, and an apple that looked perfect. Her mouth watered so much she almost drooled. But she forced herself to eat slowly, taking small bites even though she wanted to stuff everything in her mouth at once. "Why are you helping me?" she asked between bites of the most delicious bread she'd ever tasted. Marcus sat down cross-legged on the dusty floor outside her cell. "Because I know what it feels like to be locked up with nowhere to run." Elena noticed something strange about the way he said it. His voice got quiet and sad. She also saw him rub his left wrist, where thin white scars made a circle around his arm like a bracelet. "You were in jail too?" Elena asked. "Not jail," Marcus said, still rubbing his wrist. "But cages come in lots of different shapes. Some you can see, like yours. Others are invisible, but they hurt just as much." Elena studied his face. There was pain in his green eyes, old hurt that reminded her of a wounded animal. "What happened to you?" Marcus looked away for a moment, staring at something she couldn't see. "My papa wasn't always the man he is now. When I was little, he drank too much, just like Sheriff Morrison does. When I made mistakes or didn't work fast enough at the forge, he would lock me in the tool shed behind our house." Elena stopped eating. "For how long?" "Sometimes a few hours. Sometimes all night. The shed was small and dark, with no windows. I could hear mice running around, and in winter it got so cold I thought I might freeze to death." Marcus's voice stayed steady, but Elena could tell the memory still hurt him. The worst part wasn't being locked up, though. It was feeling like nobody in the world cared if I lived or died. "That's exactly how I feel," Elena said softly. Marcus looked back at her, and for a moment their eyes met through the iron bars. Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Someone understood her pain. "My papa changed after he got sick last year," Marcus continued. "He stopped drinking and started treating me different. Better, but I still remember what it felt like to be trapped." He pulled something from his pocket, a small brass key, old and tarnished. "This is from the shed where he used to lock me up. I keep it to remind myself that cages can be opened." Elena stared at the key. Such a tiny thing, but it seemed to hold so much meaning. "I've been watching your case," Marcus said. "People in town are starting to talk. Mrs. Henderson has been acting strange lately, accusing lots of people of stealing. Always Mexican folks. Always when she's been drinking heavy." Hope flickered in Elena's chest like a small flame. "Do you think anyone believes me?" "Dr. Reeves does. He's been asking questions around town. So has Pastor Williams. They think something fishy is going on." Marcus leaned closer to the bars. "There's going to be a real judge passing through next month. Judge Martinez from the territorial court. He's fair and honest, not like Morrison." Elena felt tears start to build in her eyes, but these were different from the sad tears she'd been crying. These felt warm, like maybe things could get better. "What if the judge doesn't believe me either?" she asked. "What if nobody ever believes me?" Marcus reached through the bars and touched her hand gently. His fingers were warm and calloused from working at the forge. "Then we'll make sure he has good reasons to believe you. I've been writing down everything I hear about Mrs. Henderson's drinking problem. Every time she's accused someone of stealing. Every time her story changes." Elena looked at this boy who barely knew her but was willing to fight for her freedom. "Why would you do all this for me? We're not even friends." Marcus smiled, and it was the first real smile Elena had seen in almost a month. "Maybe we weren't friends before, but we are now. Besides, everybody deserves to have someone who won't give up on them." As Marcus got ready to leave, he promised to come back the next evening with more food. Elena watched him walk away, and for the first time since her arrest, she felt something stronger than despair. But neither Elena nor Marcus knew that Deputy Carson had been listening from the shadows. Neither of them realized that their friendship had just put them both in terrible danger. The sound of angry voices woke Elena from her first peaceful sleep in weeks. Through her small window, She could see the sun just starting to peek over the desert mountains. But the shouting coming from the sheriff's office made her stomach twist with worry. That Mexican girl is getting too comfortable. Deputy Carson's voice carried down the hallway like poison. Someone's been sneaking her food, filling her head with crazy ideas about judges and justice. Elena pressed herself against the back wall of her cell, trying to make herself invisible. Carson scared her more than Sheriff Morrison ever did. The deputy had cold, mean eyes that looked at her like she was less than human. Who's been bringing her food? Morrison's voice sounded thick and groggy from too much drinking. Don't know yet, but I aim to find out. Maybe we need to remind folks what happens when they interfere with the law. Elena's heart pounded so hard she was sure they could hear it. What if they found out about Marcus? What would they do to him? Later that morning, Marcus appeared at her cell right on schedule. But this time he looked worried, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. We need to be more careful, he whispered, handing her another bundle of food. I heard Carson talking to some of his friends at the saloon last night. They're getting suspicious about someone helping you. Elena's hands trembled as she unwrapped the bread. Maybe you shouldn't come anymore. I don't want you to get in trouble because of me. No way, Marcus said firmly. I'm not abandoning you now, but we need to be smarter about this. As Elena ate, Marcus pulled out several pieces of paper covered in his careful handwriting. I've been busy. Look at this. Elena leaned closer to read what he'd written. The words made her eyes grow wide with surprise. Mrs. Henderson accused Pedro Martinez of stealing corn 3 weeks ago. She accused Maria Santos of taking fabric 2 weeks ago. She accused old Mr. Gutierrez of stealing a hammer just 5 days before they arrested you. Marcus's voice got excited as he read. Every single person she's accused has been Mexican. Every single time she'd been drinking at the saloon first. This is amazing, Elena breathed. But will anyone believe it? Dr. Reeves already does. I showed him my notes yesterday, and he's going to talk to Judge Martinez when he arrives. Marcus folded the papers carefully. But there's something else. Something I found out about Mrs. Henderson that might explain everything. Elena waited, her heart racing with hope and fear at the same time. She's been buying laudanum from Dr. Reeves, lots of it. He says she claims it's for pain in her back, but he thinks she's taking too much. Laudanum makes people forget things and imagine things that didn't happen. Elena had heard of laudanum before. Some of the miners used to take it for pain, and it made them act strange and confused. So she might really believe I stole from her, even though I didn't? Exactly. Her mind is playing tricks on her because of the medicine. Marcus looked relieved to finally have answers. Dr. Reeves says people who take too much laudanum sometimes blame others for things they did themselves. This news felt like a door opening in Elena's chest. For the first time, someone had found a real reason why Mrs. Henderson might have accused her. It wasn't just meanness or hatred. It was sickness. But their conversation was interrupted by the sound of heavy boots stomping down the hallway. Marcus jumped to his feet, stuffing the papers in his pocket. Hide that food, he whispered urgently. Elena quickly wrapped up what was left of her meal and shoved it under her thin mattress just as Deputy Carson rounded the corner. Well, what do we have here? Carson's voice dripped with suspicion. The blacksmith's boy paying social calls to our prisoner. Marcus straightened his shoulders and tried to look innocent. I was just curious about the jail, sir. My papa sent me to ask Sheriff Morrison about getting some ironwork done. Carson stepped closer, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. That's funny, boy, because Sheriff Morrison is still sleeping off last night's drinking, and I don't see any ironwork that needs fixing around here. Elena held her breath, praying Marcus would find a way out of this dangerous situation. Well, I guess I'll come back later then, Marcus said, backing toward the exit. I don't think so. Carson grabbed Marcus by the arm. I think you and I need to have a little talk about what you've really been doing here. Elena watched in horror as Carson dragged Marcus toward the sheriff's office. She wanted to scream, to fight, to do something to help her only friend. But she was trapped behind iron bars, helpless to save the person who had saved her. Minutes felt like hours as Elena strained to hear what was happening in the other room. She caught bits of conversation, Carson's angry voice demanding answers, Marcus trying to stay calm and stick to his story. Then she heard something that made her blood turn cold, the sound of a hand hitting flesh, followed by Marcus crying out in pain. Tell me the truth, boy. Have you been bringing food to this prisoner? No, sir, I haven't. Marcus's voice sounded strained but defiant. Another slap echoed down the hallway. Elena pressed her hands over her ears, but she couldn't block out the sounds of Marcus being hurt because of her. Tears streamed down her face as guilt and helplessness crashed over her like a wave. Finally, after what seemed like forever, she heard Carson's boots coming back down the hallway. He stopped in front of her cell, his face twisted with cruel satisfaction. Your little friend won't be visiting anymore, he sneered. I've made sure he understands what happens to people who interfere with justice. Elena looked past him, desperate to see if Marcus was okay. She caught a glimpse of him stumbling out the front door, holding his side like he was hurt. You monster, Elena whispered, forgetting to be afraid. Carson's eyes glittered dangerously. What did you say, girl? Elena realized her mistake too late. Carson unlocked her cell door and stepped inside, his hand moving to the leather strap on his belt. Maybe you need to learn some respect too. But before Carson could do anything, Sheriff Morrison's voice bellowed from his office. Carson, get in here. We got trouble. The deputy cursed under his breath but left Elena's cell, locking it behind him. Elena sank to the floor, shaking with fear and rage and worry about Marcus. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising rain and lightning. But Elena knew the real storm was just beginning. The thunderstorm hit Copper Ridge like an angry beast, shaking the jail with booms that sounded like cannons. Rain poured through Elena's small window, creating puddles on the stone floor. But the weather outside wasn't half as scary as what was happening inside. Elena hadn't seen Marcus in 3 days. Every time footsteps came down the hallway, she hoped it would be him. Instead, it was always Deputy Carson, bringing her just enough water to keep her alive but no food at all. Your friend learned his lesson, Carson had said on the second day, grinning like a wolf. Doubt he'll be bothering you anymore. But Elena refused to believe Marcus had given up on her. She knew he was planning something. He had to be. The question was whether it would happen before she got too weak to care. On the third day, during the worst of the storm, Elena heard something that made her heart stop. Mrs. Henderson's voice, loud and slurring, coming from the sheriff's office. I need to tell you something important, the woman was saying. About that Mexican girl you got locked up. Elena pressed her ear to the wall, straining to hear over the thunder and rain. Been thinking about that day, Mrs. Henderson continued, her words stumbling over each other. Something's not right about what I remember. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Was Mrs. Henderson finally going to tell the truth? You're drunk, Martha, Sheriff Morrison's voice replied. Go home and sleep it off. No, listen to me. I think maybe I made a mistake. The sound of a chair scraping across the floor was followed by Morrison's angry voice. You already gave your statement. The girl stole bread from your store. Case closed. But I can't remember it clearly anymore, Mrs. Henderson insisted. The laudanum makes everything fuzzy. Maybe I was the one who took the bread. Maybe I forgot I took it myself. Elena's heart pounded with excitement. Mrs. Henderson was admitting she might have been wrong. You're not changing your story now, Morrison growled. Too much paperwork, too many questions. That girl stays locked up until the territorial judge decides what to do with her. Elena heard the sound of Mrs. Henderson starting to cry. But what if I'm wrong? What if I sent an innocent girl to jail? Then that's too bad for her. Carson's voice joined the conversation. Should have been born white if she wanted fair treatment. The cruelty in his words hit Elena like a slap. She sank down onto her hay mattress, feeling hope drain out of her like water through a broken bucket. But then another voice cut through the storm. Dr. Reeves, sounding urgent and out of breath. Sheriff Morrison, I need to speak with you about Mrs. Henderson's laudanum use. There's been a serious development. Elena perked up, creeping back to the wall to listen. Mrs. Henderson has been taking 3 times the normal dose. Dr. Reeves continued. At that level, the drug causes severe memory problems and hallucinations. Everything she thinks she remembers about the alleged theft is suspect. You calling me a liar? Mrs. Henderson's voice turned sharp and defensive. I'm saying the laudanum has made your memory unreliable. Dr. Reeves replied gently. Martha, you've accused 6 different people of theft in the past month. All of them were Mexican. All the accusations happened on days when you took extra medicine for pain. Elena held her breath, waiting for Morrison's response. Doesn't matter, the sheriff finally said. She made an official complaint. The girl was found guilty by a jury of her peers. What jury? Dr. Reeves demanded. Elena Vasquez never got a trial. You and Carson decided she was guilty and threw her in a cell. Elena's eyes widened. She hadn't realized that Dr. Reeves knew so much about her case. The girl's Mexican, Carson snarled. That's guilt enough around here. Not according to territorial law, a new voice said from the doorway. Elena's heart leaped. She recognized that voice from Marcus's descriptions. Judge Martinez had arrived early. Your Honor, Morrison stammered, clearly caught off guard. We weren't expecting you until next week. Obviously, Judge Martinez replied dryly. Which is why I'm finding a prisoner who's been held without trial for nearly a month, in conditions that violate every standard of territorial justice. Elena heard footsteps heading toward the jail cells. A moment later, Judge Martinez appeared outside her cell, a tall, serious-looking man with graying hair and kind but stern eyes. Miss Vasquez, he said formally, I'm Judge Martinez. I understand you've been waiting a long time for justice. Elena tried to stand but felt dizzy from hunger and exhaustion. Judge Martinez's expression grew angry as he took in her condition. When did this prisoner last receive food? He called back toward the office. She gets fed regular. Carson lied smoothly. I can see her ribs through her dress, Judge Martinez snapped. Dr. Reeves, examine this girl immediately. As Dr. Reeves approached her cell, Elena saw another familiar figure lurking in the shadows behind them. Marcus, his face bruised but determined. He caught her eye and put a finger to his lips, indicating she should stay quiet about seeing him. Dr. Reeves knelt beside her cell, his face grave as he looked her over. This girl is severely malnourished and dehydrated. She needs medical attention immediately. Release her into Dr. Reeves' care at once, Judge Martinez ordered. Now wait just a minute, Morrison protested. That girl is a convicted thief. Convicted by whom? Judge Martinez's voice could have cut steel. Show me the trial records. Show me the jury selection. Show me any evidence of due process. Elena watched through the bars as Morrison and Carson exchanged worried glances. They both knew there were no trial records because there had never been a trial. The evidence is clear-cut. Carson tried to argue. Mrs. Henderson saw her take the bread. Mrs. Henderson, who has been taking dangerous amounts of laudanum and has accused 6 other people of similar crimes in recent weeks. Judge Martinez pulled out a thick folder. Yes, I've been doing my research. This case reeks of corruption and prejudice. Elena felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Finally, someone in authority was listening. Someone who cared about truth and fairness. But her relief turned to fear when she saw Carson's hand moving toward his gun. The deputy's eyes held a desperate, dangerous look. Judge or no judge, Carson muttered. Some problems need permanent solutions. Elena realized with horror that Carson was planning to do something terrible, something that would silence her forever. Carson's hand touched his gun just as the jail's front door burst open with a bang that echoed like thunder. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she watched a group of people rush inside, their clothes dripping wet from the storm. Stop right there, deputy. Pastor Williams' voice boomed through the hallway. Behind him stood Marcus, his face still bruised but his eyes blazing with determination. Next to them were 3 other townspeople Elena recognized. Mr. Garcia, who ran the general store, Mrs. Blaine, O'Brien from the boarding house, and surprisingly, Tom Fletcher, one of the richest ranchers in the territory. Carson's hand froze on his weapon. This is official business. All of you need to leave now. Not until we see justice done, Pastor Williams declared, stepping forward. Elena noticed he carried a thick leather folder under his arm. We have evidence that changes everything about this case. Judge Martinez looked intrigued. What kind of evidence? Marcus stepped forward, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. Your Honor, we've been investigating Mrs. Henderson's accusations. We found proof that she's been lying, not just about Elena, but about other people too. Mrs. Henderson, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, suddenly stood up, her face turned red with anger. I never lied about nothing. That Mexican girl stole from me, and I saw it with my own eyes. Then explain this. Mr. Garcia said, pulling out a piece of paper from Pastor Williams' folder. This is a receipt from your store, dated the same day you claim Elena stole bread. It shows you sold that exact loaf to Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house. Elena felt her heart skip a beat. A receipt proving the bread was sold, not stolen? Mrs. O'Brien nodded firmly. I was there when Martha sold that bread to Mrs. Peterson. I remember because Martha seemed confused about making change. She kept counting the money over and over. That's because you were under the influence of laudanum. Dr. Reeves added gently. Martha, you've been taking so much medicine that your memory isn't working right. You probably forgot you sold the bread and thought it was stolen. Mrs. Henderson's angry expression started to crumble. But I was so sure. I could see it clear as day in my mind. Laudanum can make people see things that never happened, Dr. Reeves explained. It's not your fault, but it means your accusations aren't reliable. Sheriff Morrison looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Even if that's true, the girl was still found guilty. By what court? Judge Martinez interrupted sharply. Mr. Fletcher, you're a respected member of this community. Did you witness any trial for this girl? Tom Fletcher shook his head. No trial ever happened, Your Honor. Morrison and Carson just decided she was guilty and locked her up. Been bothering me for weeks, but I wasn't sure how to help. Elena stared at the wealthy rancher in amazement. She had never expected someone like him to care about her fate. This is exactly the kind of corruption I was sent here to investigate, Judge Martinez said, his voice cold as winter wind. Deputy Carson, step away from your weapon and surrender your badge. Carson's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. You can't do this. I'm a sworn officer of the law. You're a disgrace to the badge, Pastor Williams said firmly. We all heard you say that being Mexican was guilt enough. That's not law. That's prejudice. Elena watched as Carson's face twisted with rage and desperation. She could see him calculating his options, and none of them looked good for anyone in the room. I've spent 5 years keeping order in this territory, Carson snarled. I won't let some bleeding hearts and a corrupt judge destroy everything I've built. What you built was a system of fear and injustice, Marcus said, his young voice carrying surprising strength. Elena isn't the first innocent person you've hurt, and she won't be the last unless someone stops you. Carson's hand moved back toward his gun. Maybe it's time some of you learned what happens to troublemakers. But before Carson could draw his weapon, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Henderson, who had been crying quietly in the corner, suddenly stood up and walked straight toward the deputy. No more, she said, her voice shaking but determined. I won't let you hurt people because of my mistakes. Carson looked shocked as the woman he had been protecting stepped between him and the others. Martha, get out of the way. You don't understand what's happening here. I understand perfectly, Mrs. Henderson replied. You and Morrison convinced me that my laudanum-addled memories were real. You used my sickness to put an innocent girl in jail, and now you're willing to hurt good people to cover up your crimes. Elena felt a strange mixture of emotions watching the woman who had accused her now standing up for what was right. It was confusing and hopeful at the same time. Martha, you're making a big mistake, Morrison warned, finally finding his voice. The mistake was trusting you, Mrs. Henderson shot back. Dr. Reeves has been trying to help me with my laudanum problem for months. He warned me that the medicine was affecting my mind, but you told me to ignore him, to trust my memories even when they didn't make sense. Judge Martinez stepped forward. Mrs. Henderson, are you saying that Sheriff Morrison encouraged you to maintain false accusations? Mrs. Henderson nodded, tears streaming down her face. He said it didn't matter if I was confused about the details. He said Mexican folk were probably guilty of something anyway, so sending one to jail wasn't a real problem. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain pounding on the roof. Elena felt sick to her stomach hearing how little her life had mattered to these men. Carson's face had gone pale. He looked around the room and seemed to realize that his career and possibly his freedom were about to disappear. This is all lies, he shouted. You can't prove any of this. Actually, we can, Marcus said quietly. He pulled out another paper from Pastor Williams' folder. I wrote down every conversation I overheard, every threat you made, every time you bragged about keeping Mexican folk in their place. Pastor Williams helped me organize it all. Carson stared at Marcus with pure hatred. You little spy. I should have beaten you harder when I had the chance. Is that a confession to assaulting a minor? Judge Martinez asked coldly. Elena watched Carson's face cycle through anger, fear, and desperation. She could see him realizing that his world was falling apart and that he was cornered with no way out. "This whole territory has gone soft," Carson muttered, his hand moving back toward his gun. "Time to remind everyone what real strength looks like." "Don't do it, Carson," Dr. Reeves warned. "There are witnesses here. Think about what you're doing." But Carson wasn't thinking clearly anymore. Elena could see the wild, dangerous look in his eyes that meant he was past caring about consequences. "Sometimes a man has to make a stand," Carson said, his voice getting louder. "Sometimes you have to fight to protect what's right, even if nobody else understands." Elena realized with growing horror that Carson was about to do something terrible. She wanted to scream a warning, but her voice seemed frozen in her throat. The storm outside chose that moment to send a massive lightning bolt crashing somewhere nearby, followed by thunder so loud it shook the whole building. In that moment of noise and confusion, Carson made his move. But what happened next would surprise everyone in the room, including Elena herself. The lightning flash lit up Carson's face like a demon as he drew his gun. But Marcus was already moving. The brave boy lunged forward just as the weapon cleared its holster, grabbing Carson's wrist with both hands. "Elena, get down!" Marcus shouted as he wrestled with the deputy. Elena dropped to the floor of her cell, her heart hammering like a woodpecker. The gun went off with a deafening bang, sending a bullet into the ceiling and raining down chunks of wood and plaster. Pastor Williams and Tom Fletcher rushed forward to help Marcus, but Carson was strong and desperate. He threw Marcus against the wall and swung his gun toward Judge Martinez. "Nobody moves or the judge dies," Carson yelled, sweat pouring down his face. Elena pressed herself against the back wall of her cell, feeling helpless again. Just when it seemed like justice might finally come, everything was falling apart. "Put the gun down, deputy," Judge Martinez said calmly. "Even with the weapon pointed at his chest, you're only making things worse for yourself." "Worse?" Carson laughed, but it sounded more like a bark from a mad dog. "My career is over, my reputation is ruined, and you want to talk about making things worse?" Dr. Reeves stepped forward slowly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Carson, think about this. You're not a killer. You've made mistakes, but you can still walk away from this." "I stopped being able to walk away the minute this Mexican girl started getting special treatment," Carson snarled, waving his gun toward Elena's cell. "Should have taken care of her permanently when I had the chance." Elena felt ice-cold fear run through her veins. Carson was talking about murder, and there was nowhere for her to hide. But then Mrs. Henderson did something that shocked everyone in the room. She walked straight toward Carson, ignoring the gun completely. "Enough," she said in a voice Elena had never heard from her before, strong, clear, and determined. "I won't let you hurt anyone else because of my sickness." "Stay back, Martha," Carson warned, but his voice cracked with uncertainty. "No," Mrs. Henderson replied, still walking forward. "I'm done staying back. I'm done letting men like you use my confusion to hurt innocent people." Elena watched in amazement as the woman she had feared and hated slowly transformed into someone brave and protective. "You don't understand," Carson said, backing up a step. "I was protecting this town, keeping troublemakers in line. By starving a 15-year-old girl?" Mrs. Henderson's voice rose with anger. "By beating a boy who tried to help her? By threatening to murder a judge?" Carson's gun hand started shaking. Elena could see the doubt creeping into his eyes, the realization that he had crossed lines he couldn't uncross. I was just doing my job," he mumbled, but the words sounded weak even to him. "Your job was to protect people, not terrorize them," Tom Fletcher said firmly. Elena was still surprised that the wealthy rancher was standing up for her, but his presence made her feel safer. Marcus, who had been holding his injured arm, stepped forward again. "Carson, I know what it's like to be trapped by anger and fear. My pa used to hurt me because he was hurting inside. But you have a choice. You can stop this now and try to make things right." Elena held her breath, watching Carson's face struggle between rage and something that might have been shame. "It's too late for me," Carson whispered. "I've done too much, gone too far." "It's never too late to do the right thing," Pastor Williams said gently. "God forgives even the worst sins if we truly repent." For a moment, Elena thought Carson might surrender. His gun hand lowered slightly, and his shoulders sagged with defeat. But then Sheriff Morrison, who had been silent through the whole confrontation, made a terrible decision. "Carson's right," Morrison said, pulling out his own weapon. "We've gone too far to back down now. Sometimes you have to finish what you started." Elena's last spark of hope flickered and died as she realized both lawmen were now armed and desperate. The room filled with tension so thick she could barely breathe. "Sheriff, please," Dr. Reeves pleaded. "There are innocent people here. Think about what you're doing." "I'm thinking about 20 years of keeping order in this territory," Morrison replied, his gun trained on Judge Martinez. "I'm not going to let some fancy judge from back east destroy everything I've built." Elena noticed Marcus slowly moving closer to her cell, and she realized he was trying to position himself to help her if things got worse. Even injured and outnumbered, he wasn't giving up on her. Judge Martinez remained calm despite having 2 guns pointed at him. "Sheriff Morrison, you're making the worst mistake of your life. Kill a territorial judge, and the army will hunt you down like rabid dogs." "Not if there are no witnesses," Carson said, his voice regaining its cold edge. Elena felt terror flood through her as she understood what they were planning. These men intended to kill everyone in the room and claim it was an accident or self-defense. But then, something completely unexpected happened. The front door of the jail exploded inward as a group of armed men burst inside, led by a tall figure in a military uniform. "Nobody move. This is Captain Rodriguez of the Territorial Rangers." Elena's eyes widened as she saw the newcomers. 6 armed rangers, their weapons drawn and ready. Behind them stood several townspeople, including Marcus's father and Elena's own mother. "Mama!" Elena cried out, seeing her mother's tear-stained face for the first time in almost a month. "Elena, mi niña," her mother sobbed back. Captain Rodriguez took in the scene quickly, and apart, 2 corrupt lawmen holding weapons on a territorial judge, a crowd of townspeople trying to right a wrong, and a young girl locked in a cell without proper trial. "Sheriff Morrison, Deputy Carson, lower your weapons immediately," the captain ordered. Morrison's face went white as he realized the cavalry had literally arrived. "Captain, there's been a misunderstanding. We were just protecting ourselves from armed troublemakers," Carson interrupted, trying one last desperate lie. Captain Rodriguez looked around the room, taking note of who was armed and who wasn't. "I see 2 men with guns pointed at unarmed civilians and a territorial judge. The only troublemakers I see are wearing badges." Elena felt a surge of hope so strong it made her dizzy. Finally, people with real authority and integrity had arrived to help. Marcus sent word to the territorial capital about corruption in Copper Ridge, Captain Rodriguez continued. "We've been investigating Sheriff Morrison's activities for weeks. What we found was enough to warrant immediate intervention." Morrison's gun hand started shaking. "You can't prove anything. It's our word against theirs." "Actually, we can prove quite a lot," Captain Rodriguez replied. He nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward with a thick folder. "We have testimony from 6 people wrongfully accused by Mrs. Henderson under your influence. We have financial records showing you've been skimming money from fines and taxes, and we have witness statements about your treatment of prisoners." Elena watched Carson and Morrison exchange desperate glances. She could see them realizing that their world of corruption and cruelty was finally crumbling around them. "Last chance," Captain Rodriguez said firmly. "Surrender your weapons and surrender peacefully, or face the consequences of resisting territorial authority." The moment stretched out like eternity. Elena held her breath, waiting to see if the nightmare would finally end, or if more violence would tear through the room. Then Mrs. Henderson did one more surprising thing. She walked over and gently took Carson's gun from his shaking hand. "It's over," she said softly. "Let it be over." Carson stared at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. His shoulders slumped in defeat as he realized his reign of fear had finally ended. Sheriff Morrison held out a little longer, but when he saw Carson surrender, the fight seemed to drain out of him too. He lowered his weapon and let it fall to the floor with a metallic clang that echoed through the sudden silence. Elena felt tears of relief streaming down her face as Captain Rodriguez personally unlocked her cell door. After 26 days of imprisonment, she was finally free. But even as she stumbled into her mother's arms, Elena knew the real healing was just beginning. 6 months later, Elena stood in the doorway of her brand new schoolhouse, watching dust clouds rise from the road as a familiar wagon approached. Her heart jumped with excitement when she recognized Marcus driving the horses, but something about his posture made her worry. "Elena!" Marcus called out as he climbed down from the wagon. But his usual bright smile looked forced, and she noticed he kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected trouble. "What's wrong?" Elena asked immediately. After everything they'd been through together, she could read his moods like words on a page. Marcus pulled a crumpled newspaper from his pocket, his hands shaking slightly. "Morrison and Carson escaped from the territorial prison last night. The guards found their cells empty this morning." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. The two corrupt lawmen had been sentenced to 10 years each for their crimes, and she had finally started to feel safe again. Now that safety crumbled like a house made of sand. "How did they get out?" she whispered. "Nobody knows for sure, but the paper says they had help from the inside. One of the guards is missing too." Marcus looked around nervously. "Captain Rodriguez sent word to all the towns in the territory. He thinks they might come back to Copper Ridge for revenge." Elena's legs suddenly felt wobbly. She sat down hard on the schoolhouse steps, trying to process this terrible news. "Do you think they'll really come after us?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted, sitting beside her. "But Carson swore he'd make us pay when they dragged him away. Said we'd ruined his life and he wouldn't forget it." Elena stared at the little school she had worked so hard to build. Using the money the territorial government had paid her for wrongful imprisonment, she had created a place where Mexican children could learn to read and write in both Spanish and English. It was her dream come true, but now it felt fragile as glass. "Maybe I should close the school and leave town," she said quietly. "No!" Marcus's voice came out sharper than he intended. "Elena, you can't let them chase you away from everything you've built. This place means too much to too many people." Elena looked through the schoolhouse window at the desks and chairs she had arranged so carefully. Tomorrow, 15 children were supposed to start their first day of classes. How could she put them in danger? But what if Morrison and Carson come here? What if they hurt the children because of me? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the desert horizon. "My pa always told me that running away from fear just makes the fear follow you. Maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting back." "Fighting back?" "Marcus, we're not gunfighters, we're just kids." "We're not kids anymore, Elena. Look what we've already done." Marcus gestured toward the school, then toward the town beyond. "We exposed corruption, brought justice to innocent people, and changed how this whole territory thinks about fairness. That's not kid stuff." Elena knew he was right, but the fear still gnawed at her stomach like a hungry animal. "So what do? "We get help," Marcus said firmly. "Real help from people who know how to handle dangerous criminals." That evening, they gathered in Pastor William's church with everyone who had helped during Elena's trial. Captain Rodriguez had ridden hard from the territorial capital when he received their urgent message, and his weathered face showed deep concern. "Morrison and Carson are desperate men with nothing left to lose," the captain explained to the assembled group. "That makes them extremely dangerous, but it also makes them careless." Elena sat between her mother and Marcus, drawing strength from their presence. Around them, she could see the faces of people who had become like family. Dr. Reeves, Tom Fletcher, Mrs. O'Brien, and even Mrs. Henderson, who had been working hard to overcome her laudanum addiction. "What's your plan, Captain?" Tom Fletcher asked. "We're going to use Elena and Marcus as bait," Captain Rodriguez said bluntly. Elena's mother gasped. "Absolutely not. I won't let my daughter be used as bait for those monsters." "Mama, let him explain," Elena said quietly, though her own heart was racing with fear. Captain Rodriguez nodded respectfully to Elena's mother. "I understand your concern, Senora, but hear me out. Morrison and Carson will come for Elena and Marcus whether we plan for it or not. This way, we can control when and where it happens." "How?" Marcus asked, leaning forward with interest. "We'll spread word that Elena is opening her school tomorrow as planned, with a big celebration. We'll make sure Morrison and Carson hear about it through our network of informants. Then we'll be ready for them." Dr. Reeves frowned. "You're talking about using children as bait to catch killers. That seems incredibly dangerous." "Everything about this situation is dangerous," Captain Rodriguez replied. "But this plan gives us the best chance of catching them before they hurt innocent people." Elena felt everyone's eyes on her, waiting for her decision. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. What would you need me to do? She asked. Exactly what you plan to do tomorrow. Open your school. Welcome the children. Act normal. My rangers will be hidden around the building, ready to move the moment Morrison and Carson show themselves. Elena's mother grabbed her hand. Elena, please. We could leave tonight. Go to California or Mexico. Start over somewhere safe. Elena looked at her mother's frightened face and felt her heart break a little. But then she thought about the children who were counting on her school, about Marcus who had risked everything to help her, about all the people in this room who had fought for justice. Mama, I can't keep running from the past. If I don't face this now, I'll be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. Mrs. Henderson, who had been quiet through the whole discussion, suddenly spoke up. I'll help however I can. Those men used my sickness to hurt Elena. It's time I made up for that. Mrs. Henderson, you don't need to, Elena started to say. Yes, I do, the older woman interrupted. I need to do this for my own peace of mind. I've been getting better since Dr. Reeves helped me with the laudanum, and I want to use my clear head to help catch these criminals. Elena felt a warm glow in her chest. The woman who had once accused her was now willing to risk her own safety to protect her. All right, Elena said finally. I'll do it. But I have one condition. Captain Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. What's that? If anything goes wrong, if it looks like innocent people might get hurt, you pull everyone out immediately. I won't have children's blood on my hands. Agreed, the captain said without hesitation. As the meeting broke up and people headed home to prepare for tomorrow, Marcus walked Elena to her small house behind the school. Are you scared? He asked as they stopped at her front door. Terrified, Elena admitted, but also angry. Morrison and Carson have already stolen so much from me. My freedom, my sense of safety, months of my life. I won't let them steal my future too. Marcus nodded, understanding perfectly. Remember when you asked me why I kept that old brass key from my father's shed? Elena remembered. You said it reminded you that cages can be opened. That's right. Tomorrow we're not just catching criminals, Elena. We're proving that people like us don't have to live in fear anymore. We're opening the biggest cage of all, the one made of fear and hatred and prejudice. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were different from the tears she had cried in jail. These were tears of determination and hope. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. Thank you for being brave enough to let me help, he replied. See you tomorrow. As Elena watched him disappear into the darkness, she touched the brass key she now wore on a chain around her neck, Marcus's gift to her on the day she was freed from jail. Tomorrow, she would find out if she was strong enough to unlock the final cage that trapped her. Inside her house, Elena sat at her small desk and wrote in the journal she had started keeping since her release from prison. She wrote about her fears, her hopes, and her determination to build a better world for the children who would sit in her classroom. But she also wrote about the strange twist of fate that had brought her and Marcus together. Two people who had been caged in different ways, now working together to break the chains that bound others. Outside, storm clouds gathered again on the horizon, promising another night of thunder and lightning. But Elena was no longer afraid of storms. She had learned that sometimes you had to walk through the darkness to reach the light on the other side. Tomorrow would bring either freedom or disaster, but either way, Elena would face it standing tall, with her head held high and her heart full of courage she never knew she possessed. The little girl who had cowered in a jail cell was gone forever. In her place stood a young woman ready to fight for justice, no matter the cost. The morning sun painted the desert gold as Elena unlocked the door to her schoolhouse. Her hands steady despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. 15 excited children waited outside with their parents, clutching slates and books like precious treasures. Buenos días, estudiantes, Elena called out cheerfully, though her eyes constantly scanned the surrounding area for signs of danger. She knew Captain Rodriguez and his rangers were hidden among the rocks and buildings around the school, but she couldn't see them. That was the point, she reminded herself. If she couldn't spot them, hopefully Morrison and Carson wouldn't either. Marcus arrived early, carrying a wooden crate filled with supplies for the celebration. To anyone watching, he looked like a helpful friend preparing for a school opening. But Elena noticed the way he positioned himself near the window, and she caught glimpses of the small knife he kept hidden in his boot. Any word from the captain? Elena whispered as she helped him arrange desks. Nothing yet, Marcus replied quietly, but his scouts reported seeing two men matching Morrison and Carson's description about 10 miles north of town last night. They're coming. Elena's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to smile and wave at the children filing into the classroom. These innocent faces reminded her why she was taking such a terrible risk. "Welcome to your new school," she announced to the children in both Spanish and English. "Today, we begin an adventure in learning that will change your lives forever." The children cheered and clapped, their excitement infectious despite the danger lurking just beyond the schoolhouse walls. Elena began the day's lessons, teaching them to write their names and count to 20 in both languages. But every few minutes, her eyes drifted to the windows, watching for movement among the desert scrub. Around noon, as the children ate their lunch outside under the shade of a large cottonwood tree, Elena spotted something that made her blood turn cold. Two figures on horseback sat on a ridge about half a mile away, clearly watching the school. Elena caught Marcus's eye and nodded toward the ridge. His face went pale when he saw the distant riders. "Should we signal the captain?" Marcus whispered. "Not yet," Elena replied. "We need to be sure it's them." As if responding to her words, one of the riders raised something to his face, a spyglass, studying the school and its surroundings. Then both men disappeared behind the ridge, moving to a new position. Elena's mouth went dry. Morrison and Carson were scouting the area, looking for the best way to approach without being seen. The trap was about to be sprung. "Mrs. Martinez," called out little Rosa, one of Elena's brightest students. "Are you feeling sick? You look worried." Elena knelt down beside the 7-year-old girl, forcing her most reassuring smile. "I'm fine, mi niña. Just thinking about all the wonderful things we're going to learn together." But inside, Elena's mind raced with terrible possibilities. What if the Rangers weren't in position? What if Morrison and Carson had more men with them? What if innocent children got caught in the crossfire? Around 2 o'clock, as Elena was teaching the children a simple song in English, she heard the distant thunder of approaching horses. But these hoofbeats were different from the normal traffic through town, harder, faster, more urgent. Marcus stepped closer to the window, his hand drifting toward his hidden knife. "Elena," he said quietly, "I think it's time." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice calm and steady. "Children, let's all move to the back of the classroom for our next activity. We're going to practice writing letters on the big slate board." The children obeyed happily, chattering among themselves as they gathered around the rear wall. Elena positioned herself between them and the front windows, while Marcus moved to guard the side entrance. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. Then they stopped completely. Elena strained her ears, listening for any sound that might tell her what was happening outside. The silence stretched out like a taut rope, ready to snap at any moment. Then she heard Morrison's voice, carrying clearly through the desert air. "Come out, Elena. We know you're in there." The children looked confused and frightened by the angry voice. Elena quickly gestured for them to stay quiet and keep low. "We just want to talk," Carson's voice joined in, but Elena could hear the lie dripping from his words like poison. Elena moved to the front window, staying low and keeping out of sight. Through the glass, she could see Morrison and Carson sitting on their horses about 50 yards from the school. Both men were armed with rifles, and their faces showed the hard, desperate look of criminals with nothing left to lose. "Elena Vasquez," Morrison shouted again. "You and that boy destroyed our lives. Time to pay the price." Elena's hands shook as she realized the moment of truth had finally arrived. All the preparation, all the planning, all the fear, it came down to this. She stood up slowly, showing herself at the window. "I'm here," she called out, surprised by how strong her own voice sounded. "Good," Carson sneered. "Now, come outside so we can finish this properly." "Let the children go first," Elena demanded. "They have nothing to do with this." Morrison laughed, but it sounded more like a wolf's howl. "The children stay right where they are. Insurance, in case your ranger friends try anything heroic." Elena's heart sank. Morrison and Carson knew about Captain Rodriguez's plan. Somehow, they had figured out the trap and turned it against her. "How did you know?" she asked, stalling for time. "Prisons full of talkative guards," Carson replied, "especially ones who owe gambling debts to the wrong people. We knew about your little party before we even escaped." Elena felt hope drain out of her like water from a broken bucket. If Morrison and Carson knew about the Rangers, they probably had a plan to deal with them too. But then Marcus did something that reminded Elena why she cared about him so much. He stepped into view beside her, his young face set with determination. "Elena's not coming out there alone," he announced. "If you want her, you'll have to deal with me too." Carson's face twisted with cruel amusement. "The little hero wants to play grown-up games. Fine by us, boy. We've got bullets enough for both of you." Elena grabbed Marcus's arm. "You don't have to do this," she whispered urgently. "Yes, I do," Marcus replied, his green eyes blazing with courage. "Remember what you taught me about cages? Sometimes the only way to break free is to face your fear head-on." Elena felt tears sting her eyes, but they were tears of pride, not sadness. Marcus had learned the same lesson she had, that running from fear only made it stronger. "All right," Elena called out to Morrison and Carson. "We're coming out, but if you hurt these children, I swear I'll hunt you down myself." Morrison and Carson exchanged glances, then both men raised their rifles. "No more talking," Morrison growled. "Time for justice." Elena took Marcus's hand and together they walked toward the front door of the schoolhouse. Behind them, 15 frightened children huddled together, depending on her to keep them safe. As Elena reached for the door handle, she heard a sound that made her heart soar with hope. The whistle of a mockingbird, repeated 3 times. It was Captain Rodriguez's signal that his rangers were in position. Elena squeezed Marcus's hand and whispered, "Get ready. This is about to get very interesting." She pulled open the door and stepped outside into the blazing desert sun, Marcus beside her, ready to face whatever came next. The final battle between justice and corruption was about to begin, and Elena intended to win it. But as they stepped into the open, Elena noticed something that chilled her blood. Morrison and Carson weren't alone. Hidden among the rocks and scrub brush around the school, she could see the glint of sunlight on rifle barrels. The escaped prisoners had brought an army.